people, how you doing? So, it is time for us to check out the camera comparison between the X80 Pro and the Xiaomi 12 Pro. Now, the interesting thing is, both of these phones, they have slightly different cameras, especially in that 5x zoom department, and that's where the comparison really gets interesting. Also, portraits are gonna be quite fun. I haven't really checked out any samples yet, of course, but I can tell you right now that these two areas, that's where, in my opinion at least, the major difference is gonna lie. So let's jump right in. And this is obviously just the photography. If you want to check out videography, it's gonna come out real soon. And by the way, anything else regarding these two smartphones and their camera comparisons, you can check them out using the link in the description. Alright, so our very first image, and you know what, I can tell you right now, this comparison is gonna be long, so just brace yourselves. But anyways, major difference right here. And I am using Zeiss natural colors for most of the shots because, you know, I just really like the color profile that X80 has this time around. Compared to last year, this is genuinely far more natural to look at, so compared to Xiaomi, which is definitely oversaturated. But, you know, some people like the extra vibrance, so I'm gonna leave that to personal preference. Now here's the next shot with the main camera once again, and for the most part I do like the X80's colors, but just in the skin tones I kinda like the extra bit of saturation that we have on Xiaomi. You know, if it were up to me, I would like to combine the overall color profile of the X80 with just the extra bit of saturation on the Xiaomi to get like the perfect image. But to be honest, if I had to pick one, I'll go with the X80 here. Again, personal preference. Now this right here is an ultra wide shot, and you see, having less saturation cannot always be a good thing. Like the extra bit of contrast and just the general pop that you see on Xiaomi, it is much better in my opinion. In this case at least, given the overall overcast conditions and just the general look of the photograph, Xiaomi is definitely doing a much better job, while X80 just looks way too subdued. But in this ultra wide, I mean, it just flips around immediately. You know, you get a much more natural looking shot on the X80 with all of the colors looking exactly like they did to my eyes when I shot them. You know, it was overcast, so obviously you didn't exactly have the most vibrant looking colors in general. Xiaomi on the other hand is definitely making things look very vibrant. Some people like it, some people don't. Personally, I like the X80, and another thing to note is that depending on which phone you're viewing this on, it's gonna either look a little more saturated or less saturated compared to my display, so you know, keep that in mind. Up next, another main camera shot, and you know, it's the same story with the colors. I like the X80 here more compared to the Xiaomi, but you can go either way you want. For the most part, we are gonna continue with the zoom test now. Now this right here is 2x zoom, and I must say I kinda like the contrast on Xiaomi right here. I think X80 looks a little too flat. Like the saturation is spot on, but contrast maybe a little bit more could have helped it right there. But otherwise, very similar, you know, good details. The shot itself looks really nice on both, and you know, maybe if we were to use, let's say, high resolution on Xiaomi, we might see extra detail. That's coming up, of course. At 5x, however, and really anything beyond, you're gonna see better results from X80 because it has 5x optical zoom. Although do keep in mind, the optical zoom is not very high quality in terms of the sensor. It's just an 8 megapixel one, not the best optical zoom that you're gonna see, not by a long shot. But compared to not having the 5x periscope zoom on Xiaomi 12 Pro, you're definitely gonna see better results on X80. At 10x, I think, you know, the difference is very obvious, and I would go so far as to say that at 10x, you can get probably really nice and usable results on X80, like right here. While Xiaomi, I wouldn't really consider this to be very usable. Now, of course, overcast conditions, so obviously we can't exactly get very good HDR shots. So we are gonna go indoors and check out the dynamic range shots right here. And I mean, it's very close. First and foremost, the X80's colors. I've been saying this throughout, but they are so spot on. Like, it's not just, you know, lower saturation, that's why it looks more natural. Not like that. The tone of the colors, the white balance, it is very accurate compared to what Xiaomi is doing. Xiaomi is good. The X80 is definitely much more realistic. But other than that, I think another major thing is that the HDR processing on X80 feels much more natural, because if you see around the edges of the windows, there's a weird halo on Xiaomi, while the X80 has very little of that. Like, I can see some, but it's not too crazy. Now, I have been going on and on about how Zeiss natural colors is so good. Now, maybe you don't like it. there's a very good chance of that. And so this shot right here is without Zeiss natural colors, and you can quite easily see that yes, contrast may be slightly lower on the X80, but the saturation levels are very close. Like if you don't like the unsaturated look you get with Zeiss natural colors, you don't have to use it. You have the option to get nice popping vibrant colors like the Xiaomi 12 Pro on the X80 as well. I think that really counts, that kind of choice. I really appreciate that. This right here is with Zeiss natural colors, and you can see immediately just how it just subdues all of that red, and compared to the previous shot it might look really desaturated, but trust me when I say that is exactly how it looked in real life. And it is quite something that the X80 continues to nail colors so well for like 95% of the images. Moving on though, now we are going to check out high resolution, and this is going to be quite interesting. So right here we have 50 megapixel shots from both phones, and this is with the main camera of course, and there is slightly higher contrast on Xiaomi, but zooming in, and I think a major difference here is that Xiaomi 12 Pro has higher sharpness and higher noise levels. Like there's quite a bit of grain making its way into the image, while the X80 is squeaky clean. Like it's one of the cleanest high-res shots that I've seen in a long time. But that said, it does have slightly lower sharpness, and the lower contrast also makes it look less detailed. Personally, I like the X80 more. It looks very clean, very organic, again very realistic. But I can see why people would like Xiaomi here as well. But for the most part, they're really close. Now for the ultra-wide cameras with high resolution, one of the things I really don't like about Xiaomi is just how oversaturated that magenta is in the painting. It just makes it look weird, and it almost looks like the color isn't blending with their other two, even though it does in real life. I mean, the X80 is definitely much better. It shows off the texture in my painting as well. So I think that is precisely why I would pick the X80 any day. But as for details, I think the X80 has more detail, as in it shows off the textures more, but we do get this weird artifact. You can see it in the lower black portion of the painting. There are some weird sharpening artifacts maybe. Xiaomi is much smoother comparatively, and it's almost like the reverse places compared to the main camera high resolution shots. Yeah, even then I just like the less saturated look on the X80, so that's gonna be my pick. Now in terms of details, you could go either way, just pick whichever one suits you the best. I actually like Xiaomi's detail preservation technique more. Up next for 2x, and we can use 50 megapixel mode on the Xiaomi 12 Pro with the 2x telephoto as well. Nothing as such on the X80. And well, surprisingly, it's not all that good, because far as I can tell, the X80 actually looks less over sharpened and just as detailed. I checked that I didn't actually mix up the shots or not, but yeah, this is exactly the result that I got, and it was in good lighting and everything. So I don't know, I'm not exactly sure why Xiaomi's shot doesn't look detailed enough, even though it should be. Now finally, one major advantage on the X80 unquestionably is the presence of a good macro mode. I mean, you can see the difference right here. I don't really have to spell it out for anybody, but yeah, I mean, it makes such a huge difference. The versatility is already higher on the X80, and with a macro mode, it just makes it so easy for you to get incredible close-ups as well. As I said before, I'm not really sure why Xiaomi 12 Pro doesn't have a good macro mode. I mean, the Mi 11 Ultra last year, that one had it. I don't know why it's been skipped here, but if at some point Xiaomi 12 Ultra or something like that comes out, I do hope it brings back the macro mode. Now then, selfies and human subjects in general, this is going to be interesting. So it appears that the X80 Pro has improved the selfie cameras by quite a bit, because I clearly remember the X70 Pro Plus from last year having much more wonky colors and contrast being weird, but that was not the case this time around with the selfies. And once again, right here we can quite easily see the difference in the skin tone and the colors. I most definitely prefer the X80 in this case. There's just too much red and saturation going on the Xiaomi 12 Pro. And one of the things that is quite surprising is that both phones have a 32 megapixel sensor, so technically the details should have been similar. And I think the best way to visualize it would be to just take a look at the pavement behind me. You can see that Xiaomi has no texture, no detail at all in there, while X80 is very nice and sharp. And the same goes for my face as well. It looks kind of smoothened out on Xiaomi, even though all beauty modes were off. So again, even more reason for me to prefer the X80 in this case. Moving on though, HDR. Now this is a problem on the Xiaomi 12 Pro. I mean, I've showed it off before as well. You can check out the previous camera comparisons using the link in the description, but yeah, it's pretty obvious that X80 is taking a massive win, and I once again like the skin tones on X80 as well. Next up, for portrait selfies, I kind of like the overall contrast on the X80. Xiaomi just looks a little overexposed. You know, there are certain areas of my face that look a little too bright, especially when you consider the fact that it was just starting to pour, and I mean, you can see the raindrops on my t-shirt. But yeah, for the most part, given the scene and the situation when I took the image, X80 looks far more natural and far more realistic. Now in this case, well, it was going down pretty heavy, and well, I was out there taking a selfie and I liked it. But anyways, point is that the Xiaomi 12 Pro once again looks kind of overexposed. I really like the way the X80 is handling things. It is blowing out the highlights, just like the Xiaomi 12 Pro, but it looks very natural as it is doing that. It has very good contrast in general, and I really like the skin tones once again on the X80. Now that may be a personal preference, but the other things, I think those we can all agree is it's just better on the X80. Now finally, night mode selfies. Maybe the situation was a little difficult for Xiaomi 12 Pro, but clearly it is not doing a nearly good enough job compared to the X80 Pro here. And you know, for the most part, selfie camera improvements, I'm all about that on the X80 Pro. I'm definitely liking them. But what about portraits? Well, it's kind of the similar story, but I think Xiaomi is much better with rear camera portraits than it is with selfies and selfie portraits in general. So right here, I'm using planar portraits on the X80 Pro. I really like the way it makes portraits look. What it does, far as I can tell, is it kind of increases the general contrast on your face when you use it, and I think it makes things look really nice. Even in this case, you can see the contrast on the X80 is far more without actually causing any issues compared to the Xiaomi 12 Pro. And that stylistic bokeh in the background, I mean, I am a die-hard fan of that. Now, some people may not like it. That is definitely a personal preference thing. So, my preference, unquestionably, goes to the X80 here. Now, these shots are with 2x zoom, and yes, we finally got an inkling of sun coming out, so I just had to take it. But yeah, one of the things that is kind of surprising is that X80 and Xiaomi 12 Pro both have very similar vibrance in the grains, but the skin tones are more saturated on the Xiaomi 12 Pro. I'm just surprised that the X80 saturated it so much, because for the most part it has been really sticking to the natural look. So in a way, this is kind of an inconsistency on the X80, believe it or not. Now here's another one. This was mildly backlit, not too much, but one of the things that I noticed immediately is that the Xiaomi 12 Pro seems to be brightening up my face a little bit, and honestly I'm not the biggest fan of that. I like the contrast on the Xiaomi, but the general photograph I preferred on the X80, especially because of the, much more natural looking saturation, in the background and everything. So that's my preference. Now this right here is pretty interesting. So X80 Pro can do a cinematic portrait. Basically, it's going to use a 21:9 aspect ratio to take ideally landscape photographs with anamorphic bokeh. Now you cannot see too much of that here. I have a better version coming up soon, but for the most part I think it's a pretty interesting option to have. That's the whole thing about Vivo and the X80 Pro in general. It gives you a ton of options, and you can just choose and just get images that look very personalized compared to something like the Xiaomi 12 Pro, which will do a generally good job, but really the customization and options, they're not really there. Also, you can get this emulated anamorphic lens flare in there as well. I'm a pretty huge fan of that. Now here, once again, we got a little bit of sun coming out through those clouds, so I had to take a backlit portrait. Now, I think it's pretty obvious which phone is doing a better job here. The X80 Pro, unquestionably, it has good contrast despite the fact that it is lifting up the shadows and just giving us so much more detail in general. There's no noise. And surprisingly, even compared to the Xiaomi 12 Pro, X80 has less noise, and this is just the best image I could have expected given the conditions. Last but not least, we obviously have the night mode portrait with the X80 Pro. Now granted, the bokeh in the background, it's a little janky, it's kind of all over the place. I don't know why there's bokeh in the ceiling, but anyways, compared to the Xiaomi, even then I think X80 is doing a really good job. Now in this case, I would recommend not using planar portraits because as you can see, with it trying to increase contrast and all that jazz, it is kind of making my face look a little too bright. And that's one of the things you need to keep in mind. You do have a lot of options and they work well most of the time on the X80, but sometimes, like in this case, it'd be better if you just use a normal portrait mode. You won't have any of the problems with the bokeh or the extra brightness in the face. I did say there was a better example for cinematic portraits, and this is the one right here. I think the best place to use this mode is going to be at night with some lights in the background, because you're gonna get beautiful bokeh as you can see right here. And there's also the anamorphic lens flare. You can turn it on or off, that's up to you. Now then, moving on though, we have night mode, regular rear camera night mode. So here I think there are two major things. One is a lens flaring, which is better on the X80 compared to the Xiaomi, which has quite a bit more of it. And then there is the general look of the photograph, which is much more natural on the Xiaomi 12 Pro, believe it or not. You can see the sky is much darker, which is generally preferable by a lot of people and even by me. While X80 is definitely the one that gives you more detail, more brightness in general, and also blue skies, which is very excessively evident right here. Sometimes I do like the blue skies on the X80, but there are multiple instances where it'll just go overboard, and this is one of them. Compared to this, Xiaomi looks so very natural. It is kind of saturating the greens a little bit, sure, but that sky alone makes the image look about 10 times more natural compared to the X80. Same story here, even with this ultra-wide camera. We do get more lens flaring on the Xiaomi 12 Pro, that was expected, but otherwise, the X80 is not even nailing the white balance in this case. It's definitely not the best showcase of the X80 Pro's night mode in general. There are better images and better cases where the X80 Pro can do a better job, but if you want to take outdoor shots and you do not like blue skies, the Xiaomi 12 Pro hands down is gonna do a better job. Here's another main camera shot. This was just to show you guys the full-blown sky, and yes, it was overcast, so we do get some grayish looking sky on the Xiaomi, which is again natural. But the X80 just goes crazy with the blue. Now then, indoors however, this is where the X80 really shines, because as you can see, this was sort of a backlit situation and X80 is doing a far better job. It gives you so much more brightness on the subject, and granted it is blowing out some highlights in the background compared to the Xiaomi 12 Pro, but for the most part I think if ultra low light situations are where you really take a lot of photos, then the X80 is actually going to do a better job compared to the Xiaomi. That is not to even mention night mode styles. Look, I'm never gonna forget about this one, and I'm never gonna stop mentioning it either, because it is just that good. At this point, I don't think I even have to spell it out, because there are so many modes, and just the fact that you're able to combine the quality of images from night mode and this crazy shift in colors and basically differential color selection and all that jazz, it really is something else. You can try using this with maybe some raw photographs, and you have to go to Lightroom and then play around with the HSL curves, but here there's nothing like that. You can just select any of the modes you like, there's a plethora of them, and then just point and shoot. It's just that easy. But what about ultra low light? This is sincerely dark, and going any darker, I think that would just be absurd. Well, the thing is, quality of both images, they're good. The problem with the Xiaomi 12 Pro is that I had to take 13 shots just to get one that focused on the subject. Now, if you take a wider shot with something in the distance, then it's probably not gonna have such a problem, but X80 had zero problem with that. First shot itself came in with good focus and no issues whatsoever. Next up, an ultra wide shot in maybe semi ultra low light, if that is even a word or a set of words, I don't know. But point is, both are doing a pretty good job. I think the X80 has a little bit more artifacting, especially in the lower part of the image, but Xiaomi is just crushing shadows in general. Now, which one you prefer, that's gonna really depend on the kind of look you like, but for the most part I think both are doing a really good job considering the situation here. But because of that, I had to go a little bit darker, of course, and this is just to show you exactly how dark it really was in the situation. Neither the camera nor I could really see anything properly in this case. And well, the reason I showed you is because we got results like these. It just took a 7-second exposure, which was very easy by the way, even without a gimbal OIS. But yeah, there is a surprisingly stark difference between these two. The Xiaomi 12 Pro, I think predominantly it just suffers because it takes like a 2 maybe 3 second exposure at best, while X80 it can prolong its exposure, and that really plays into its favor. Next up, for 2x zoom with night mode, I think both are doing really good. I like the Xiaomi 12 Pro here. It is giving much better contrast, and the X80 it looks too flat in my opinion. So my preference will go to the Xiaomi. But in ultra low light situation right here, it would appear the X80 used the 1x zoom and just cropped in, while Xiaomi used the 2x telephoto, but it didn't take a very long exposure. Now ideally, what I had actually expected from the X80 is that it would use that crazy amazing gimbal OIS that is in the 2x telephoto camera for some very odd reason, and it would use that for night mode. And with that enabled, we could take like 7 to 10 seconds worth of exposure without actually worrying about hand jerks or shakes. That is genuinely how good it is, and I've used it before. But we can't really use that capability on the X80. I don't know why. It really calls into question, why do we even have that stabilization feature if we cannot use it for night mode? But other than that, that's the end of this camera comparison, man. I think this is gonna exceed 20 minutes. Like, I tend to keep my videos below that, but I don't think this one's gonna stay there. Anyways, I think this was a very interesting camera comparison. There were quite a few major differences, and one of the things that I really appreciate about the X80 is that although not a lot has changed in terms of the camera setup itself, I think on the software side, Vivo has improved by quite a bit. We have a better selfie camera, like much better processing, much better skin tones in general. We have really good and proper natural color modes like this ice color, and it works really well in my opinion. It gives such amazing natural looking results, and if you don't want it, don't enable it. It's just as simple as that. But yeah, for the most part, I think if anyone were to ask me, I would say the X80 Pro is a more fully fledged camera in terms of photography compared to the Xiaomi 12 Pro. That is my take after this entire camera comparison. Now your opinion may differ based on the kind of photographs you might end up taking, but for me, if I had to pick one and walk away, it would be the X80 Pro. So with that said, I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, definitely hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and well, I'll be seeing you guys soon enough. And if you want to check out any of the other camera comparisons that I may or may not have already done, check out the links in the description. Cheers!